Hi, and welcome to the Route to CISO Podcast. It's me, Chris Rides. I'm going to be your host, and I'm going to be chatting to seasoned Chief Information Security Officers about their career journeys. We're going to be unencrypting their real-life stories and searching for the hidden keys to help you fast-track your cybersecurity career. I'm excited to have Johann Balaguer with me. Johann, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good stuff. Look, this is so funny because we actually didn't know each other. We met in Spain on a recent trip that we both went to separately with separate groups. And Johann was told by Larry Whiteside Jr., who was the first guest on season 1, to look out for me. And in a huge conference, we managed to bump into each other on the reception on the very first evening. How crazy is that?
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. What a coincidence.
Yeah, 100%. So good stuff. So I'm glad we met because we've chatted a little bit since then, and I managed to persuade you while I was there to come on here and tell me and our audience all about your career. So thank you so much for giving up the time to do this. I know it's quite a patch of time, and CISOs are very busy people, so I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Good stuff. Well, let's start with maybe you just giving people a little idea of what you're doing right now, and then once we're done, let's dive into how you got into this crazy career that is cybersecurity.
No, it's great. So I'm currently the global CISO for Hard Rock. I'm also an adjunct associate professor, so I teach cybersecurity courses. Been doing that for about 14 years already. And still going. I'm also a board member of a South Florida nonprofit called South Florida Tech Kids. And I'm also a founding member of the Cybersecurity South Florida chapter. So the foundation that Larry Whiteside and Dan Bryan founded.
Great. Yeah, what a great foundation as well. Those guys, they're wonderful. And Cybersecurity is doing an amazing job. So shout out to those guys for founding it, but shout out to everybody that volunteers like you that actually makes these things happen, because our industry is built on the shoulders of people volunteering to make these things great. So yeah, we appreciate people like you that find the time to do that. Thank you, mate.
Yeah, you're welcome. And this is one of my many passions. Along with, aside from that, also I'm also an advisor to many different organizations, from startups to more mature organizations.
Good stuff. Yeah, I think with the amount of experience you've got to give, I'm sure there's quite a few banging on your door to get some of that experience into their startups and into their businesses. So good stuff. Well, look, how on earth did you get into cyber? I mean, what were you doing even before that? What's the foundation that this is built on?
So this started at a very young age, right when computers really started to hit every home. As I was barely a teenager and I asked for a computer, and obviously I want to say it wasn't too long ago, but it's starting to be. They were pricey. They weren't as cheap as they were today, and thankfully my parents invested in that, and I just grew a passion for computers. I don't think there was a moment once I got that computer that I didn't start to tinker with it and see all the capabilities and everything that I can do, and it started to become kind of natural to me. Back then, obviously, cybersecurity didn't really exist. Everything was more about how you can leverage, a computer to do word processing or help, businesses, small businesses and large businesses, not only do word processing, but financial transactions, automate as much as they could using spreadsheets. So it definitely wasn't what it is today. And then for me, I think people around me started to notice that I knew about computers. So as computers started to grow in households, businesses, I was frequently called upon to kind of assist, troubleshoot. And start to expand. because back then it was all about the different peripherals that you could get. Computers didn't even come with sound. You had to buy add-ons, add on peripherals, from speakers and sound cards. So it was very interesting, But going back to, I think that's what it was, something new and something that you could build upon, and it had so many different options. That you constantly, for me, it was a passion of trying to see what can I do with it. How much further can I take it? So that's kind of where it began.
Yeah.
And then exploded from there.
And did you end up studying, like going to college for like in computer science or something?
So I did.
Okay.
So a couple things. So this was before high school is when I started getting. So I think I was barely 13 when I got my first computer. And as I grew into high school, I think it was started around junior year. You start to get your electives. And we had a computer course, but that computer course was really teaching students on how to type, right? So it really wasn't what it is today. I think when I started getting to, I think it was junior year or senior year, there's an option to take a Turbo Pascal course.
Okay. Wow.
So back then, my thought was, I want to be a programmer, computer programmer. So in high school, I had a couple of friends of mine who were also getting into computers and becoming passionate, and we started actually programming. Everything from Turbo Pascal to C++. We started just building and tinkering with computer programs. So that's where we're really, the real sense of what a hacker is, right? Not the non-ethical component that what it is today and what it's become, but an actual, software and computer programmer. The official term back then was a hacker. So we started doing that, and we started building programs. To let's just say, some of the programs that we built back then wouldn't really be legal today.
Right. You can shed more light or less if you wish on that.
So look, honestly, let's just say I found creative ways to make money.
Okay, all right.
While I was in high school, the computer would just be on at home, and it would just be automating processes. Let's just say that.
Okay, all right.
And maybe a check would come in the mail.
Excellent.
But look, it's all things that obviously it wasn't really malicious what you would consider today, but obviously I think in today's up-to-date laws you can no longer do that.
Yeah.
But
taking advantage of the holes that were in and the gaps that probably back there were in, with it being so new.
Exactly, but it goes back to, it's just a passion of mine, and I was in the computer club. I was in Future Business Leaders of America. My passion at a young age was computers and business.
Yeah.
But I also grew up with a love and a passion for the military. So I wasn't really the studious type of student in high school.
Yeah.
I really, my mind was 100% set on not just having fun, but thinking about the future.
Right.
It wasn't in the textbook,
mm-hmm.
which is really funny because I would have never in my life thought, number one, I would be a drug professor,
right,
or even obtain a master's degree and several executive leadership courses from everything from Columbia University to Yale and MIT. And if you would ask the younger self of mine, that would be like, there's no way that that I would ever get even a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. I always was thinking about the tech courses. Back then it was all about becoming an MCSE or an MCSA. So it was my, aside from computer programming, it was like, oh, I want to be a sysadmin. I think once I really started digging into computer programming, that's when I started to learn that it wasn't for me. I joke around. I tell people, I think today is a little bit easier to program than it was back then because a lot of line by line code.
Yeah.
I joked around. I was like, you need like a psychologist, after a while, and it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was passionate about computers, and I was passionate about the military, and I decided to join the United States Marine Corps.
Wow.
So a little bit right after high school, I took a little bit of break. Going back to, you know, a friend of mine and someone he worked for, knew that I was really good with computers. So I had some time before I had to go into boot camp, and a local pharmaceutical company hired me to build their websites and their online, you know, pharmacy / delivery, site that would even tailor the Caribbean. So I did that until right before I had to go away for boot camp, and then in the military you have options for different career paths, and I obviously wanted a job in the military as something computers.
Mm-hmm.
But the military has something called quotas.
Okay. All right. And no, I don't know anything about this. So this is really interesting. I was going to ask you more about this. So I'm interested how easy it is to actually say, well, I want to do something computer related.
Well,
I'm getting the feeling not that simple.
It's not that simple because, there's positions that need to be filled, right? That are important. So you kind of have like a wish list. You ask for a wish list of what kind of jobs, and they will try their best to put you in that job that you want. But it's pretty much you choose like 3 different career paths, and then you'll get one of the 3. Sometimes you may not get one of those 3. You'll get put into something else unless you have a contract that specifically calls out you will get one of these. But it's not as simple as that is. So I did put computers, and my recruiter was like, you know what, you really don't want to do that job. He was kind of leading me towards a different role,
Right.
And then now I realize why he was trying to meet a quota and fill a position. But either which way, the job that I got, I ended up getting was in a career path that was logistics and jumping out of airplanes.
Okay.
So at that young age, I thought, you know what, I would love to jump out of airplanes. So I was like, I want that job. So
there's a whole new meaning to parachuting in for something, right?
Exactly. So it's air delivery.
Yeah.
So it's called the 04 career path in the Marine Corps. So at the end of the day, you really don't find out what job you get until you are actually in boot camp. So I shipped out to boot camp, and the Marine Corps has the longest boot camp. It's 3 months long. And when I joined, it was right before the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And if for any reason I was not to pass and successfully complete boot camp, there would have been a chance that I wouldn't be able to come home, for the holidays. Right, I would have been stuck in boot camp during the holidays. So, it's tough. The Marine Corps is a very tough, military organization. That's why they call it, the few, the proud, the Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So luckily, I completed boot camp. I earned my Eagle and Anchor. I became a Marine, and I got home for the holidays. But I did find out during boot camp that I did not get the job to jump out of airplanes. I got another job that is it's called a red patcher. So, and the red patcher is because this is the only job in the Marine Corps that actually has a red patch on the military uniform. You have it, on your knees, on each knee, and then one on your cover, which is also referred to as a hat, but it's in the Marines we call it a cover. So some people call that red patch a target,
right?
but it's the meaning of it is that position in the Marine Corps we're called as the first in and last out.
Mm-hmm.
The first one's into conflict and the last one's out. And why we are that red patch is for everyone to know that we are the ones who are going to direct where everyone needs to go, whether
Right.
it's military equipment or personnel. So it doesn't matter what rank you are in the Marine Corps. We have the full authority in that zone to direct personnel and equipment, and it's kind of it's kind of a position of authority, which is great. So kind of like before, when I was in the Marine Corps, while I was not in that computer position, that job role, people started to see that I had the skill sets. I knew about computers, so I kind of had that as my second job.
Right. Yeah. Nice. It's funny. It's almost like the extension of. Oh, I'd imagine as a kid growing up, it was Johann's good with computers. Go and ask him, and then it develops all the way into the Marine Corps. Who'd have known, right?
Exactly. So I was called upon. I built one of the first websites for our unit. I won a military award for it and everything. So at the end of the day, the job that I actually received in the military was fantastic. I loved it. I loved, to this day, I love the Marine Corps. If I could, I would go back in a heartbeat. But so I got to do the two great things that I've always wanted to do, right? So join the United States military, become a Marine, and also kind of do another job and computers. So I did that. Unfortunately, the time I joined was the start of 9/11 happened during my time. So I was one of the first ones to deploy to Afghanistan and the Middle East, and on a Marine expeditionary unit. I was one of the first ones in Kuwait and Iraq for the start of the Iraqi war. So it took a toll on my family.
Right.
So
yeah.
They kind of it took a toll, and they asked me to leave, and for my safety. So I decided to leave. So when I got out, actually, taking a step back, while I was in the Marine Corps, one of my first duty stations was Okinawa, Japan. So I was stationed there, and I lived in Japan for a year. And on the military base, they have different universities, in an education center. So I decided to use some of my tuition assistance money and take some college courses. And I started, my undergraduate studies abroad. Same thing when I was on the Marine Expeditionary Unit. They had, professors that would be on we're on a U.S. Navy ship that would be on the ship and teach college courses at night. After we're done with the day, and I took advantage of that. So when I left, I had a couple college courses under my belt. I started going back to pursuing my IT career right back then, and I went to a technical college to get my associate's degree in computer network engineering. That's where I met one of my buddies who said, "Hey, there's openings, at the United States Southern Command," and I was able to get a position there at the help desk.
So is that a transfer? You're still within the army, and is that how it works?
Well, no, it's actually a civilian.
Right. Okay.
Civilian position. So
Yeah.
not in the military. But it's great because, going back to, I really miss being in the military, and it was just like I was back in it, but as a civilian.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic. I started off at the help desk there. I grew into a tech support role. I started to, as well studying, I got my network, engineering associate's degree. I started to take courses to get my bachelor's degree in management of information systems. And I grew into a tech support role, and then I started going down the path of a sysadmin role. But then there was a position that was open for network engineering, and I applied for it. I took a technical exam because it was myself and someone else who was up against this one open position. And I'll never forget this. They said, "Look, we can't really decide between you both, but we're going to go ahead and do a blind test on you."
Okay.
And what they did is they set up all this networking equipment, but they put a sheet over it, so we had no idea how it was configured or how it was interconnected. So they threw us on a command line, and we had to determine how everything was connected. And thankfully, as they were quizzing us and asking us questions, and I was, determining the command line, I was able to figure it out, and I got the job, which was great. So I did that for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, I heard that there was this position open, and back then it was called information assurance,
Yeah.
which is today's cybersecurity.
Yeah.
So, same thing. I applied for it. I got the job, and I was literally in a room of just like four of us.
And was that was your first cybersecurity kind of dedicated role? I'm guessing you must have touched on it a bit throughout all of the other bits you'd done.
I did, and going back then, it was still not what it is today. It was more, it was firewalls, so it was more like security engineering, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and a virus, right?
Right.
It's not, what it is today with all the, the different technologies, the whole, bingo card of different options and, flavors of things and, the advanced cybersecurity technologies and capabilities that we have today. But I grew a deep passion for it. I ended up, I ended up taking over the responsibilities of that team. So what it is today, it's a CISO role, right?
Yeah.
And it had everything from the cyber defense to offense and even the information assurance. So everything from what you would consider today as GRC and policies and data protection and resiliency components was all kind of built in there. So I grew that team from 4 to about 20. And, that command is responsible. It's one of 10 command commands run by a 4-star general. That 4-star general only reports to 2 people in this world. That is the Secretary of Defense and the President of the United States. That's it. And it has full responsibility for all of Latin America and the Caribbean. So think of every single military installation, every single U.S. embassy, to include even, Guantanamo Bay and the prison camps that are there. So a lot of responsibility, oversight, and I just grew that team, and that's really my true first CISO role, where I started building and learning, and I became hungry. I started obtaining, every single cybersecurity, certification that was available at that time. I started to expand and taking just every single course out there, from SANS courses to other ones that vendors would offer, and I just fell in love with it. Fell in love. So that was really the first true cybersecurity role, and I went from there. And I led all the offense and defense capabilities of that command, for a very long time. And
was that, so did you say that was your first CISO role or that was your first cyber
correct
role?
That was my first CISO role. The thing is that back then, that the chief
the title
it didn't exist, right? That's not what it exists. I have it on my resume at LinkedIn that I was a deputy, and the only reason I put that is because I reported up to the head of security. But if you look at it today, it was the CISO, but the head of security had also cryptography.
Right.
So, all the encryption of the communication. So I had nothing to do with that part. But if you look at it, so that's why I just say deputy. But in reality, I was the CISO and had every responsibility you see today on that.
Yeah.
But it was great. I did that, for a little bit over 8 years. And then back then, it was the beginning of what is today the United States Cyber Command. So what happened was there was a lot of funding, capabilities being taken out of those commands and centralized in Maryland, to where is United States Cyber Command today. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall. I was like, you know what? I think it's time for me to go into the private sector.
Right. Yeah.
So some of my buddies were starting to do that, and one of them reached out to me for an opportunity with Starwood Hotels and Resorts worldwide. And they have since were bought by Marriott. So that's Marriott today is what I work for, and I was
like Westin and all of those guys, right?
Sheridan's, So I was responsible for the security of all the properties globally. So think of it more like the head of security architecture,
Right.
for all the properties. It was,
Presumably they'd have somebody that like did physical security that would be
correct.
separate, right?
Yes, that was separate. So it was great. I did that for a while. And then I got recruited for a very unique opportunity. And this was with Assurant, which is a global, insurance organization. And I was hired to be a part of the internal audit function, to be the cybersecurity subject matter expert for the internal audit function. And this was because they want an independent assurance that their security program was, up to par. It was effective, that it was mature. So it was great. I worked for, directly with not only the chief audit executive, but reporting, to different boards, whether it's a non-executive directors, overseas. I did a lot of fraud work. I did a lot of work with mergers and acquisitions, a lot of due diligence work, a lot of assessments, not only of the corporate environment, but also our third parties that were entrusted, with our customers' data. So it was a fantastic opportunity.
And who
Learned
was
a
this
lot.
for? What was the firm?
Assurant.
Assurant. Right. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're still around today. It's a great
Yeah.
organization. So I work really closely with the CISO there, and with the security department, with internal audit, with the different business units. Learned a lot about that business. I learned a lot about corporate governance, enterprise risk management. So that laid a lot of foundation for, corporate, and how a global corporate organization runs, functions, and that organization was built many, many years ago. So, still had a strong culture, company culture, and it was a fantastic organization. But just like in any other role, I was recruited to join another fantastic organization called Ultimate Software. Truly one of the best companies I've ever worked for. It was back then a publicly traded organization, but it was kind of run like a mom and pop organization. It had one of the best, what I call a unicorn culture that I don't think we'll ever see. Right? The model was people first, and that was truly embedded from the CEO all the way from the chief people officer to every single employee.
And what did they do as a business?
So human capital management. So
Right.
just basically developing software similar to Workday and ADP. They built a very strong human capital management platform, and it was fantastic. I was recruited to build a brand new team that was very proactive and vulnerability research and management and pen testing and risk and it was just a great organization. Everyone from the founders really instilled on every single employee that not only do the people of the organization matter, but so do our customers. So really, that service model was just ingrained in everyone. There was a place that everyone came happy to work and would bend over backwards because they knew that company had everyone's backs.
Yeah, they cared, right? It goes
They
both
really
ways,
cared.
right?
They really, really cared. So, the unfortunate part is that those founders, it came time for them to retire. So they sold it to a private equity and then they merged with another organization and it became what's today's UKG.
Right.
Further growth there. And then I was recruited to join Hard Rock. And become their global CISO, and been here for about a year and a half now, and it's been a fantastic ride. Doing fantastic things where we have such a fantastic brand and organization, and we're continuously growing and building out, and I've been empowered to mature and expand this security program. to take us, along with the ride that Hard Rock is doing.
Yeah.
So really great, organizations I've worked for, each one very unique. Everything from publicly traded to private. Aside from that, going back to adjunct associate professor, working for nonprofits, working for a lot of young startups to mature organizations and advising them, to doing all the mentoring, through Cybersecurity,
Yeah.
through South Florida Tech Kids. So think of it from Cybersecurity. We're really targeting everything from your university to people who are out already in the business and are employed. With South Florida Tech Kids, it's more at the younger age, right? So think of middle school, high school, mentoring them into the IT world, cybersecurity. So I've been very blessed to surround myself with very smart people.
Yeah.
I've been given these opportunities to not only allow me to grow personally, but professionally. So that's kind of my journey in a way.
Well, that's quite the journey. Everything from, I feel like it's almost like British Bake Off, if you ever watch that. Like, so everything from here's all your ingredients, pull it off, and let's like right the way from there to like getting into the hospitality. And actually, I want to talk about that a little bit, or ask you a few more questions on that, because you made it seem very simple to come out of the military, even as a civilian, to come out and then go into more of the public space, more of the commercial world. A lot of people struggle with that. There are a lot of people that are trying to make that transition, or they've got that transition coming up soon. What did you do to get that opportunity, and or any of the opportunities you had around that time? Was there anything specific that you did that you think, well, this is the sort of thing that people need to know about because these are the things they should do?
So what I did is I was always hungry. I was always hungry. I was always learning. I surrounded myself with people that allowed me to grow. I surrounded with myself around people who were willing to mentor me, to be there for me, to allow me to ask questions, who gave me the opportunities that challenged me, right? And I always say that there's two worlds to every situation that you're in, right? You're going to be surrounded by really good people that are going to do just that, what I said, right? Empower you and mentor you and give you those opportunities. But you're also going to be surrounded with very people who are siloed, who only care about themselves, who only care about their own, career path and growth, are very negative, right? And I see, I always tell people to, that's really good too. And the reason why I say that is because that teaches you everything not to do.
Right.
So, people, say that they like my leadership style, and they like, that I do, that I very, I mentor people, and I give them the opportunities, and I challenge them, and I say it's, my style is I've always grown in a way that I've taken all the bad things and promised never to do them,
Right.
to the people that are underneath me or that I'm leading or that I'm mentoring. So I always take all those instances and things that I've experienced, and I've always taken them in a way that I can leverage it for the better.
And how, like with doing that sort of thing, which I think is great, you're almost learning from other people's mistakes, right? Which is, there's no better way to learn. If you can afford to not make the mistake yourself, then all the better for it.
100%.
How did that help you make that move? How did that come about in terms of
So what's great is I going back to, I think people saw who I am and how
Right.
genuine I am and what I can bring to the table. So that's where, I've been offered, many opportunities and roles, and I've been entrusted to not only take people into battle, right? I was a platoon leader, and I was in charge of Marines and with their lives, but also personnel in corporate levels. I've been put into positions that normally other people in those type of roles would never be afforded the opportunity. And I think it's because I think I've built that trust, and that relationship, and I've always come at it from a partnering
Yeah.
perspective. And it's not just with the people around me, but it's with other business leaders, even partners, right, that aren't even part of the business. I always tell everyone, even my, the vendors and the people that we do business with, it's not about the transaction. It's about the relationship you build with each other, because you may not be with that organization today. You might be with some other organization, and you may, I may lean on you, or you may lean on me. And at the end of the day, if you think that it's transactional, and then you're not going to talk to me until renewal or something else, then that's, I could tell it's not a true partnership.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest skill that anyone can have is the soft skills, the personal skills.
It's like relationship building is kind of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, you never want to be a brilliant jerk.
Yeah.
That is the worst thing that you could ever be or be surrounded by. Because you might be the smartest person in the room, but if you don't have the ability to speak to people, to get to their level and help them understand, some of the constraints and issues that they're dealing with, and you're just always a jerk about everything, or you have a negative outlook, and then no one's going to ever want to work for you or work with you. So that's kind of, I think, what's led me to be afforded some of the opportunities that I've been given.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're not, you're always treating people the way that you would like to be treated yourself. And when you meet people, even if you only meet them for a short amount of time, you never know when your paths may cross, right? So, creating the right impression, being yourself, but like, being nice to people, giving people the time when you can, and explaining, if you can't give them the time, at least, explaining why that's the case, like not being a jerk about it, as you said. Like, you end up building a network of people, and they might not be people you see every day, but those are the people that are going to think of you when opportunities arise. And
exactly,
most of the CISOs I speak to, that's how they're getting their positions. I mean, I don't, here I am running a recruitment business. I want to tell everybody they're all getting their positions through us, all coming through Tyro Security. But the fact is that, like, I know companies that only do CISO placements, and they're like, those companies are not doing a lot of those every year, right? It's not, by far, most people are getting their roles through who they know, recommendations, people they've met, that sort of stuff.
Listen, I go back to, I think I've been blessed, and I am who I am because of the people around me. And this is not just the people I've worked with, it's my family, right? I've been very lucky that, even in this role, at Hard Rock, I brought in a large chunk of people who worked for me in the past, and not just in my last organization, but people that I took from my other organization and followed me to my last one, and now are in this one. There's one of my leaders where, I challenged her, throughout, the positions, the different organizations that she's joined me with. And, she's one of my most trusted leaders and advisors. And it's because I've challenged her, and I've demonstrated of who she could be, right, and her potential. And I tell my employees, when I have all my all hand meetings, and I tell them, whether my door is open or closed, that door can be closed, but it's always open to you. And you don't need to schedule a meeting. You can just knock on my door, and if I'm not in a meeting, if I am, I'll tell you, hey, please come back, or we'll schedule time. But I'll always meet with you, and then my door is always open, and I'm always, here to listen, whether it's a business problem or a project we're working on, or if they just want advice. I'm there to listen to them and to empower them. that's my duty as a leader, is to empower the employees to be successful.
It's always a good sign when people are willing to follow you and are interested in following you to the next place you go to, right? That's and sometimes that can't happen for multiple reasons, but the fact that they want to do that, it still says a lot about your sort of management style.
It does. I go back to, I can't say it enough. I'm blessed. I'm very fortunate to have that. I can't believe it, right? That they would. I know I wish I had so many more open positions, because I would, offer more opportunities to more if I could. But I think that's fantastic, right? And that only allows us to, if you surround yourself with good people, at the end of the day, everyone's going to win.
Okay, I think that's a great spot to end part 1 of our interview with Johann. We're going to follow this up next week with part 2, when we're going to delve into more of his experience and career. So watch this space. I hope to see you back next week. Thank you for listening to the Route to CISO podcast. If there's something you really want me to ask on the next episode, or if you're a CISO who wants to inspire the next generation, please reach out. I'll leave a URL to my LinkedIn profile, and make sure you connect and message me there. We're always looking for feedback, so please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.